Minit is a small game with a big problem. That problem is so significant that I have to put my spoiler warning right here in the first few seconds of the video. I can't show much without revealing huge portions of the game, so please be informed before continuing that Minit is not a bad experience, it's just one that is very short and not that deep. If you enjoy the top-down Zelda games, then you'll probably like Minit, but you'll be lucky to get 2 hours of quality time out of it. Spoiler warning has been served, so let's begin again. Minit has two things that make it stand out. The first is its art style that harkens back to the original Game Boy. While I think Minit takes an even more abstract approach than Link's Awakening, the similarities were clear to me. That both games have you find a sword on a beach early on solidifies the intentions as far as I'm concerned, plus the main track that plays at the start is called Minit's Awakening. Yeah, I think this is a slam dunk. The second thing is that Minit is split into 60-second runs from which the game takes its name. This system was the primary reason I bought the game. I'm really interested in time being used as a tangible resource in games, whether that takes the form of a rigid cycle in something like Don't Starve, activity slots in Persona 5, the subtle ways Deus Ex Human Revolution used it, or the more extreme end of things with time loops in Majora's Mask. The Zelda influence in Minit, coupled with how fundamental the 60-second timer seemed to be, made me think that the game would be on the Majora's Mask side of things. The wording of the game's summary on Steam also helped that along, stating that each day comes to an end when the 60 seconds are up. This may be my own fault for having the wrong expectations, but I thought this time limit system implied a Groundhog Day style time loop. There was an episode of Supernatural that also did it really well. The timer snaps into effect when you pick up the sword on the beach and are inflicted with a curse. For the first few screens, I was erroneously under the impression that this was a time loop. Characters in this area say the same things to you each time you meet them, and there were two clever ways that the time limit was used that led me to believe the system was going to be creatively exploited throughout the whole game. The first is an old man who is standing outside a lighthouse with an agonizingly slow text speed, which became a joke that got funnier as it went on and the timer got close to zero. The second was using a watering can on a plant growing in a field next to your house. Major changes caused in each run persist after time runs out in Minit, so it made sense to me that the plant needs to be watered each day to grow, and since each reset sends you back to the beginning of the day but with the plant still being watered the day before, you can cause this thing to grow to maturity in the same day over multiple runs. It's a stretch, but it makes sense within the context of the game and your supposed time powers. Unfortunately, the rest of Minit proves that this isn't the case. Characters aren't meeting you for the first time in each cycle. They remember you and what you've done. There's progression and changes being made in a much more standard way. This makes this plant growing bit make little sense, but with this type of game, things don't always have to follow reality. Instead, whenever you run out of time, you simply die and are sent back to your modest house that would still sell for over $1 million in Toronto. There is no time loop, it's only a limitation on how much time you have before your current life is over and you have to restart. This is a problem for me because it turns what could have been an enthralling concept into the same thing that so many other games have already done. Super Mario World had a time limit on each level, Stardew Valley had a limit on each day. Minit takes that exact thing and essentially slashes it down to 60 seconds with little creativity backing it up. Even world design, which I was looking forward to unraveling as I played, was a disappointment. My initial expectation was that there would be safe zones in the world that allow you to freeze time, or some sort of enemy or collectible that adds a second to the timer so the world can continue expanding far from your starting location, because otherwise 60 seconds would be far too limiting for the world having any sort of depth. Minit does not resort to these things, but instead cheats by having different starting locations that you can lock your character into upon discovering them. In this way, you can see the world map divided into many different levels or paths of progress. You have these lines that lead to the screens away from the starting locations, and they all diverge into different paths that all take less than 60 seconds in order to complete. Very rarely you'll be unlocking the way across an obstacle in your first run to shorten the time on runs after that. Which brings us to this video's The Obligatory Dark Souls Reference. The closest comparison I can make is to the suicidal runs you can do in Souls games. If you need an item behind some high-level monsters, or decide you don't want to clear all the way to a key or a switch needed to open an area. You can sprint your way there, do whatever you need to do, and then die because those actions persist after death. Minit is a series of those kinds of tasks spread out over its small world, but doesn't have any compelling combat, interesting characters, or any story to overanalyze on top of that. I want to hammer this point down because I feel bad about criticizing an indie game that tried to do something different. My first playthrough of Minit was barely over an hour long. I wasn't rushing either. Getting 100% completion took a bit longer, but that comes with its own mess of problems and isn't that enjoyable of a time. New Game Plus acts as a hard mode with some changes and a 40-second limit instead of 60 seconds, but I was able to beat this mode of the game in even less time while also going for 100% or 112% as it displays. You will have to be squeezing real hard to get 2 hours of good time from this game, and I am fully prepared to meet the cringe head on when I read the comments below about what did you expect from a game 1 minute long, but that doesn't change the reality of Minit's value as a product. For $10 you could get far more enjoyment out of other games in both quantity and quality. I don't know if that means Minit is overpriced or if that most other games are underpriced and that the entire system needs a big shakeup. I don't have enough information to judge that. It could be priced a bit higher than it should so it can go on sale for a reasonable discount without being too cheap. All I can say is that compared to current games priced at current rates, Minit doesn't offer enough. It feels like it's a baby step up from a browser game. Some browser games can be great, but of course can also be played without buying them on Steam. Examining the game divorced from the price still leaves much to be desired. Despite having a very simple combat system, Minit is a puzzle game more than anything else. Sometimes those puzzles will be figuring out what item allows you to do something within the 60-second limit, such as getting running shoes to make it through a maze in the desert to get a heart container, or realizing that some upgrades unlock one of those progression paths from an earlier starting point. There's an arsenal that you collect and have to recall where new upgrades are applicable. The swimming flippers are the strongest example of the world opening up and options unlocking. While some of these items can be fun and rewarding for those, aha, I remember that, I know where to go right now moments, they also show how irrelevant the 60-second time limit really is. No amount of time would have ever made water passable until getting the flippers. No amount of time would have made it so you can repair this boat without finding a specific source of wood for its owner. The timer is rarely a part of the game's experience. There's a third playthrough of the game that shows this. In Mary's mode, you play as a ghost without the time limit. It's here that you can feel how arbitrary the limitation really is, and it's for that reason I'm shocked it was included. It's as if the game is pulling off its mask at its own masquerade party. The game feels like an old adventure title like this. It reminds me of a game I played as a kid called Treasure Island Dizzy. You wander around, you pick up items, you find a use for them somewhere, and then find another item to use somewhere else. Some of these upgrades also have questionable placements. The sword oil, which allows you to strike faster with your sword, is one of the final things you'll get, likely after already finishing the game when you don't need it anymore, for anything. It requires you to find the tentacles of this octopus monster, and they're spread throughout the whole world after you've already pretty much conquered the game. You don't need the sword oil anymore. The same could be said for the running shoes, which you don't really need either, which is a shame because if this was a set requirement early on, like the coffee, lighthouse key, and a flashlight before it, then it could have opened up more possibilities in pushing the time limit further since you know players have increased speed and can therefore make the distances longer. Something like this was sort of done in the 40-second mode since the lower time meant that having the faster speed was heavily incentivized, plus you likely know the locations of many coins to get the shoes faster. However, aside from some remixed enemy placements early in the game, not much was changed in New Game Plus. You die in one hit, which pushes the difficulty up, but combat is so shallow that it was a minor change outside of the dark underground screens, where scorpions can move so quickly that you die without seeing them first. Considering that the game is about resets and cycles, a mode that resets and cycles the entire game could have been a great opportunity for some massive changes involving the time limit system. Instead, it's just a little tougher, and since you already know the layout of the world, the 40-second limit change has surprisingly low impact. But I've said a few times now that the time limit doesn't really matter much. So how does the game function if we ignore it? What are you actually doing? Sometimes you'll be fighting crabs, snakes, or dodging attacks in some combat encounters. Other times you're pushing blocks, which is definitely a very Zelda thing to do, but it's also a part of those games that can get boring. Other puzzles have you navigate teleporters, hit switches in the right order, hit switches on a conveyor belt, throw your sword across a river, throw your sword at bombs, or look for hidden trigger points on screens. These are so simple that I don't think I need to go into any more detail than that. None of these are bad, but I don't think you could consider them good either. A few puzzles do cross out of that neutral zone into good. Figuring out that you need to enter the screen from this side so you can push this box into the sea to hit a tentacle is a decent challenge. Same for picking up this bone and thinking of taking it back to your dog in your starting house. On the bad side of things, you have this puzzle that requires you to wait around until the snorkel guy comes up for air. That's it. That's That's all you do. I thought that using the watering can to force him to come up by being an evil asshole by pouring water down his snorkel would have done it, but nope, that doesn't do anything, you just wait instead. Same for waiting in this room for a plant to randomly explode so you can get a coin collectible. These collectibles, coins, and hearts are the main meat of the completionist part of the game after the end boss. Some of these reward reasonable curiosity, like swimming to previously inaccessible areas or going behind a waterfall. Others require huge leaps in logic and guesswork like that exploding plant. Some of these are okay and make sense when you do get through them. The ghosts around the world also helpfully nudge you with hints that don't always explicitly spell out the answer, which is good. This quicksand one leading to a secret area is only bad because it's not clear that it's even quicksand unless you try stopping your movement while in it, which, considering the time limit in the game, is something I doubt most people will do, but I could be wrong about that. Apart from that, this makes sense. The ones that don't involve smashing every item you see and walking into the walls around you on the off chance that there's something hidden there. Again, none of this is bad, but considering how tedious this can be, and that it counts toward almost half of the measured content in the game, it's a big disappointment. However, that's clearly side content. It's the time limit that I keep snapping back to as my main source of disapproval. Consider this early encounter in the game. A barkeeper near your house is having issues with crabs preventing customers from getting to him. If you kill all 5 crabs, he rewards you with coffee. In the current system, when you die, the crabs respawn, and the bar owner is still miraculously happy with the job you did for him. If Minit had employed a time loop instead, this could both explain the crabs coming back, but also present opportunities. Let's say there's another use for the crabs later down the line. You still keep the coffee by interacting with them in this first way since the items you collect persist between runs, but now there's this additional interaction in this new timeline where you didn't solve the bar's crab problem. The same can be seen in other encounters. The first time you meet the angry spirit in the desert results in combat for the sword throwing glove, but if there's a time loop and it respawns, there could have been further development on this enemy. It's annoyed that people are damaging the plants. What if the throwing glove unlocked a path that leads to another item that allows you to solve this spirit's problem and have a different outcome with him, instead of this being a one and done encounter? NPCs could have had schedules and tasks they perform within these 60 seconds that you can help with or interrupt for different results. And there could even be a Groundhog Day style gauntlet with solving everyone's issues within one day as a challenge for the best ending. This sort of stuff would work well with the game's small world since it would expand on things in a vertical, focused way instead of spreading to many screens far from starting locations. As always, I know these aren't the best ideas because they're not meant to be ways the game could literally be altered, but instead serve as examples of how the game could have explored something in a deeper way. An alternative to there simply being a time limit like so many other games that happens to be a bit stricter to provide tension in an artificial way. Ultimately, I don't know what the purpose of Minit really is. Nothing about it was offensively bad, but even as an experiment involving time limits, it doesn't explore anything new. And then it would also have to justify charging you an entry fee to be involved in that experiment, when there are fully fleshed games available for the same price that maintain a higher level of quality over many more hours. There's definitely something to enjoy in the game's presentation, especially the upbeat music that sweeps you quickly into another run upon a reset. But I can also see the simplistic retro style being another thing to lead players' expectations toward a sprawling world to explore that just isn't there. Unless perhaps I have the pun in the title all wrong. It's not minute to minute, it's minute.